Today, we get to hear from Ericka Porter on the topic of fear. I don't know about you, but fear is a thing that puts me on the sideline of my own life more than anything else. For so many of us, being a mom brings with it a heightened sense of fear, anxiety, and worst case scenarios played out in our minds. And if you've ever felt worn out or weakened by fear, this is a video for you. Drawing from poetry found in 2 different Psalms, Ericka paints a beautiful picture of how God intends for us to relate to our fear. Without further ado, here is Ericka Porter.
Okay, friends, I'm gonna let you know about one of my most life-threatening fears. I am terrified of swimming in the ocean. Now, I love going to the beach. I love sitting in my lawn chair, getting my sunglasses, putting on that suntan lotion, and looking at the water. It's beautiful. But getting me from my chair, through the sand, and to the shore and into the ocean, it's not gonna happen. I have friends and family that live in Florida. They always invite me, and I always feel like this is gonna be the day where I can get into that ocean and swim. I even have a self-talk. I usually say self. Actually, I usually say, Ericka Michelle, you can do this. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful water. Go and do it. And I usually chicken out. But there was this one day where I was just feeling particularly brave. And I was like, this is it. This is the day. I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to go into that ocean. I'm going to swim and come away feeling like a rock star. So I stand up and I walk through the sand and I start walking into the water. And soon enough, the water is knee high, and then it's up to my waist, and then it's at about my chest. And then I'm doing those self-breathings, I'm talking, and I'm doing great. And just about when I'm going to swim, I see a shadow go by me, and I freak out. Literally, I freak out so much that I panic and I paralyze. My feet are stuck in the sand. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna get from this point to my chair in 3.5 seconds, and I can't do it. And quite honestly, I think I peed a little. You get what I'm saying. And then I see the shadow go by me again, and inside of me, I'm like, okay, Ericka Michelle, you gotta get out of this water. And as I'm coming to and having rational thoughts, I'm starting to move, and then I see the shadow move again. And then it dawns on me that this whole time that I've been freaking out, I was freaking out about my own shadow. The movement and everything that was happening was my own shadow. Yeah, that's a true story. This is exactly how fear works, isn't it? It feels so real. But in reality, the thing that you're losing sleep over is no more harmful than your own shadow. Even when I realized that it was my shadow that I saw in the water, I lost all my courage and I headed back to my lawn chair and on the beach. The shadow won that day because I let fear call the shots. So what about you? What in your life appears to be real, like really real? What seems to be overshadowing what is good and beautiful and true, and it grips you with fear? Maybe you're afraid that all your kids see is a stressed out mom. Maybe you need to work and raise your kids and you're missing time with them and that makes you fearful. Maybe you fear people's judgment because you're a single mom. Maybe you're afraid that even with all of your efforts, you'll never be good enough. Maybe you're facing a secret addiction and the fear of others finding out is overwhelming. Maybe you're afraid that every time you see your kids off in the morning into this crazy world. Maybe you fear your parents are getting older and you're eventually going to lose them. Maybe you just feel like you're drowning in all the stuff and fear keeps you from talking about it. Let me just first say this. How you feel is so valid. You are not alone. I mean, look at all the women gathered around you right now. If we all wrote down all of our fears, the room would be filled with them and we'd see that they're all the exact same ones and we would be reminded that we're all in this together. I believe moms, women, and humans, we allow fear to take a lot of the space up in our minds. We allow it to govern our decisions, keep us stuck, and steal our joy. MOPS moms, I want to appeal to you today that fear is a perception problem more than anything else. It's believing there's a shark when there's really just a shadow in the water. So as we decide to rise this year, how do we begin to right-size our fears? How do we prevent it from causing us to get out of the water and then sit on the sidelines of our own life? I want to share 2 passages of scripture with you about fear and specifically about shadows. The first one is a pretty famous passage in Psalm 23. Maybe you've heard it. It says, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. David, the author of this passage, knew all about shadows and all about fear. And that's why this passage is so powerful, because he declares that even in the middle of the darkness, his fear is gone because he knew God was with him. What this tells us is that God's presence can take us from panic to peace. Notice it doesn't say God's presence takes us out of our valley, but that he is with us, and that's always enough. When I was trying to overcome my fear of the ocean and found myself paralyzed by my own shadow, I was not thinking about God's presence. I wasn't even thinking about the 1 in a million chances of getting attacked by a shark. All I knew is that some massive sea creature was coming to eat me, period. No other rationale. Maybe you can relate to this in your own life, but my encouragement to you is this. When you start sensing that fear creeping in, I want you to remember that God is with you. Learning to become more aware of this fact is one of the best ways you can combat fear. In the same passage, David paints a beautiful picture of God's presence. Now, as I read this, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to take a deep breath. Okay, now I want you to imagine yourself in these words. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along right paths for his name's sake. Doesn't that sound peaceful? It doesn't sound anything like fear, right? Remember, God's presence replaces our panic with peace. So when you read the next verses about walking through the valley of shadows, let us have confidence that the same God who leads us beside still waters walks with us in the valley of the shadow of death. Now, I mentioned at the beginning there were 2 shadows that the Bible talks about. The first is the shadow of death and fear. The second one is the shadow of the Almighty God. Psalm 91 is one of the most powerful passages when it comes to overcoming fear. David says this, "Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." This is a vastly different kind of shadow, cast by a completely different source. This is God's shadow. He says, those who live in his shelter will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Knowing God is with you and choosing not to fear takes living in constant relationship with him. It means in the midst of the very real fear you feel, you need to run to him. Share with him where you are and what you're feeling. It means trusting him with what you fear, knowing that he will never leave you. It's deep knowing that no matter what life brings, darkness does not get the last word. A really important phrase that stood out to me are the words, find rest. So let's read it again. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. When we turn from fear and we run to shelter in God, we find rest. How many of you know that living in fear is exhausting? We play out all these worst case scenarios in our head over and over and over again. We already have so much to do in the day, and spending our energy living in fear and worry, it's no wonder we're all worn out. But God's desire for his daughters, you and me, is to live in the shadow where you will continually find rest, true rest, lasting rest. The same God that is with you in the shadow of fear, peers, casts his own shadow over your life, a shadow which you can put your fears to rest. So what does that look like practically? How do we do this when we have a laundry list, literally, of things to do? How do we even start when life's valleys seem too deep and too dark to even try? Listen, sisters, I'm going to be honest with you. Though fear is only a shadow, it is a relentless one. It will show up throughout your day trying to infiltrate your mind and your heart. So it is important that you practice combating it on a regular basis. Start small. Take a deep breath. Go ahead, take another one. Then talk to God. Talk to him about your fears. Share with him where you are, honestly. Acknowledge your own very real fears. For me, I have a very real fear of never getting married and having children of my own. I'm afraid I'll be alone at the end of my life. So how do I walk through this valley of fears? I come to God raw and real and with lots of emotion. And it's usually riding home in the car because that's where my most meaningful and heartfelt conversations happen with God. So car time is a good tool. I choose to believe and trust that He loves me, that He has my future in His hands, and that He will never leave me. I run to Him and I find rest when I do. The fears fade and I feel Him quieting me with His love. So what about you? What could this look like for you? Is it going for a walk and having a heart-to-heart conversation with God? Is it spending time in reflection and journaling? Is it singing your heart out to a song that speaks right to where you are? Is it getting honest with some friends that you trust and talk about what you're fearing? Is it sitting quiet with a cup of coffee before the whole house wakes up and being still with God? Is it asking a mentor to pray with you and over your fears? Is it finding a few Bible verses to meditate on throughout the day? Psalm 23 and Psalm 91 are great places to start. I encourage you to write down a list of all the things that you're afraid of and journey through the Bible to find truth statements that combat that fear. By the way, if you're wondering, just this summer, I ventured to Hawaii and I conquered my fear of swimming in the ocean. I jumped out of a boat that was in the middle of the ocean and I actually swam with sea turtles. It was amazing. So if I can conquer my fear, I'm sure you can too. I want to leave you with a few things. Fear, in essence, is just a shadow. God is with you in the midst of your shadows. You are never alone. Remember, you can find rest and protection from fear and worries by abiding under the shadow of the God who loves you.